you've had a career that, I mean, anyone would absolutely kill for. You've been killed on screen many times. Journalist, stage, screen, television, author. But I have to start with this. You're incredibly intelligent, incredibly well spoken, incredibly nice. I know other people that have interviewed you. Why are you always the bad guy in everything?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that. The first volume of my memoir, which I wrote largely because I had a lot of stories and wanted to put them someplace. But one of the legs that volume stood on was I was trying to come to a conclusion of why this had occurred. And some of it is institutional typecasting. Despite the fact that Hollywood is supposed to be operated by quote-unquote vision, often because of time constraints and everything, they make the most readily available decision about things. And sometimes that works in your favor if you've done that kind of work. But as a result, you end up being typecast. So I think, particularly in TV and those kind of things, that's the kind of thing that people who are charged with vision, cinematographers, filmmakers and stuff, are under such pressure, particularly after the money happens, that they have to make decisions really quickly. So they'll make very quick ones. And so you get typecast. It happens to everybody. I mean, Rutger Hauer, very superb actor, no longer with us, but he started out as a leading man. And then once he did such a great job with Hitcher, it was hard for him to get out of the bad guy stuff. So the truth is, it goes in waves. Like you'll play bad cowboy who gets redeemed, and if you do a good job, that's what you get offered for 2 years. Or if you play corrupt cop, that's what you get offered for a couple of years. So if you want to keep working, which I always did, having a family and all of that, then I would do it. Also, it's rich acting terrain. But one of the things I realized when I was writing the book, in fact, after I finished that book, was in first grade, my elementary school did a play, The Pied Piper of Hamelin, and they cast me as the villain, the mayor of the town. So whatever energy was that began very, very early. And then when I was playing sports in high school and that kind of thing, I was always given like the middle linebacker monster man positions, or in some cases I played wide receiver, but in general I was given my freedom to go anywhere on the field and wreak havoc. And in a sense, that's the same role that villains do. I don't think they pay any attention to the fact that you're particularly intelligent or educated. They just know you're doing a good job. But there was something about me, because I was physical, because I was 6'2", because I was 220 pounds, and had a intimidating voice, that it lent itself to that. But the energy to play villains and the antagonist side of dramatic stuff started really early in my life. And I think it has to do with a certain exuberance, sort of. I was very physically reckless, whether it was motorcycles or downhill skiing, or when it got to be stage, doing my own stunts and things like that. So that lent it. There's no question I could have played leading men too. And I did a little bit of that in the beginning. But then you settle in and bango, you go that. You get into it. I think I actually learned how to play heroes a little bit later in life. And the things that are necessary for a villain were easy for me to access in the early days. So that's basically it. And it's, when you write a memoir, you have a lot of legs that you're trying to stand on. You want to give some information about the inside process of acting, great, funny, scandalous stories. You want to get the romance and the poignancy of it. That's what I really was trying to get at in one element of the memoirs. And I'm not so sure I completely have the answer, except that, people, I generally get treated very, very well, because people take one look at my face for some reason and think, oh my God, I better be nice to this person or he's going to kill me. And given the fact that I was into guns and firearms and combat sports and I call it movie black belts, I guess for an average person, those things can be intimidating. What's really great is to meet people who are not intimidated by that, because frankly, the guys who play bad guys across the board are the nicest of people.
They are. I interviewed, and I've said this in many interviews, I have no problem ever praising the guy, Mateus Hughes. I interviewed him a few years ago. The bad guy in every movie of the 90s, nicest man in the world.
Yeah. Well, I think you exercise that kind of whatever anger and demons come out of you, because for most people, acting and writing and producing and directing are very healing processes in large measure. So I think you cleanse your system of that kind of mean-spiritedness. On the other hand, if you ask people, comics are often really dark, and very, very neurotic people. And they're exercising that and their art in their own way too. So, Brian Thompson, Alan Rickman, guys who played really, really good villains I've always met really great people. Pretty much across the board.
Now, I watched this again last night, and I'm pretty sure it was you, although I couldn't tell, you're half painted. Your first film was The Toxic Avenger, correct?
Yeah, I played the guy with the black and red face paint.
You shot the dog.
Yeah, I robbed the taco stand.
Yep. What was it like when you made that? When you guys were doing that, did you ever figure it would go on to be one of the greatest midnight movies in history?
Of course not. I thought it was the worst movie ever made in the history of Western civilization. I at the time was a just beginning actor. That was not a union film. I wasn't in SAG. I was doing a lot of, I had gone to NYU to study film and videotape, and I was doing a lot of New York University student films. And in fact, Toxic Avenger really was just an extension of that. I went up to it, and I talk about it in the book. They loved my performance, so they doubled my salary for the week from $75 to $150. And I have a lot of funny stories in the book about that film, but absolutely not. I thought it was the worst exercise. The funny thing for me was I had just done one of the leads in the largest production in the history of PBS, which was this, highfalutin period piece and everything. And so the reviews came out in the New York Times, and on one side of the page, we had this glowing review from PBS, and on the other hand, a glowing review on Toxic Avenger. But no, I had no idea that Michael Hers and Lloyd Kaufman they were very visionary in the way they distributed things. They went state to state, section of the country, and distributed it. And the movie seemed to hit some sort of, it's a generational thing. Look, movies like that hold no fascination for me. but there's that generation loved ironic gore and things like that, and it struck a chord for them. So I'm more of a Saving Private Ryan, French independent film guy, or Braveheart or something like that. But one thing you learn about this business is almost anything will find an audience.
Now, it should come as no shock to you that the next one I'm going to mention, and you'd mentioned that you wrestled. We got to see some of your wrestling skills when you were murdering students in class of 1999.
That's right. Yeah, the Fireman's Carry.
That is one of my top 5 favorite movies of all time.
Well, I'm glad. That wrestling, I wrestled 1 year in prep school at 127 pounds, but that stuff sticks with you because you're talking about doing it over and over and over. And I had a hunchback wrestling coach. Let me tell you, it's very hard to pin a hunchback. There's no solid angle, so you virtually cannot pin down his shoulders because they don't exist. So Coach Marr, and so I had a wonderful time doing wrestling with him, and it stuck with me. And so it was. I think I was able to do a fireman's carry on whoever that was in class of 1999.
Yeah, fireman's carry, then about like 9 axe handles to the chest, and what were your feelings making that film? Did you think that would be a cult hit like it's become over the years?
Well, you know, it had some really great elements to begin with. The script had been polished by the guy who polished Sid and Nancy,
great movie,
which is a big film with Gary Oldman, and that was something that intrigued me. And I was a big fan of Pam Grier and John Ryan, and I liked that. So it had a lot of good elements before. You know, I talk about it in the book. I auditioned in a wheelchair, and because I had a calf augmentation operation on Friday. I had a car accident when I was 17 and almost died, and it had asymmetrical nerve damage down the backs of my legs. And one of the results of that was my calves completely atrophied. So years later, when I'm very, very fit and my body's very developed, it was kind of a visual anomaly that I had no calves at all. So I was going to Gold's Gym, and I ran into this procedure that bodybuilders were doing, international competitive bodybuilders. And it was, they put in 3 hard silicone implants in your calves. And so Screen Actors Guild paid for it to be done because it was reconstructed. And I had them in on Friday, and I couldn't walk yet. And I rolled into the class of 19 audition, and I told them I'd had knee surgery. I figured that was the easier thing to do, a little white lie. And I got hired. And it was the perfect cosmic timing. I've always had good cosmic timing. Like I just bought a bike and bought the bicycle the day before they closed down all the retail shops here in L.A. So I've always kind of miraculously, because I think life is miraculous, kind of been ahead of the curve on my reactions to things. So anyway, I had this operation, and the next day, on Tuesday, they're making a full body cast of my body, and the calves worked out perfectly for it. And so I was right under the wire for that.
Did you have fun making the film?
Yes, I did. And I'll tell you, about 4 hours after we met, Pam Grier became my lover. And
lucky man.
Yeah, she was awesome. I mean, she was incredible. We were together about 4 months. funny story of why we broke up is in the book, but yeah, I mean, it was just that was amazing. I loved working with John Ryan, and I loved watching Stacy Keach and Malcolm McDowell. I had a really great time, and also it was filmed in Seattle. Seattle's such a great city. At that time, all the culinary people from LA were moving north, so they would go to San Francisco first, then they would go to Seattle, and eventually they made their way to Vancouver. Now they've come all back to LA, but Seattle had the most incredible food. I mean, I couldn't eat seafood in LA for 2 years after how fresh everything was in Seattle. And so I had a wonderful time doing the movie. And yeah, it was just a great experience all the way down the line. To be honest, Corey, I always enjoy working. And I've worked on I did a film a while back with a Nigerian store clerk who thought he was Martin Scorsese, and he definitely was not. But I got really great stuff out of it. I've enjoyed every job I ever did. And I love them for different reasons, and sometimes the lowest of the lowest low-budget things are just best. And big-budget things pay a lot of money, and but sometimes you don't have so much to do because you're just one of 500 moving parts. And so in that case, I take my computer and I do a lot of writing or try to develop some films and stuff while I'm in there sitting in the trailer.
The main actor in the film, Bradley Gregg, I believe was his name, who played Cody. He did a really good job in that, and I saw him in a few other things, and then he just kind of disappeared. He showed a lot of promise. Do you have any idea whatever happened to him?
I've spoken to Bradley and run into him at a couple of events. I don't know that we directly talked about why. To be honest, on one level, there's no explanation for that. I did a show called Tour of Duty, and the guys who were on that show that I thought would have the most sustaining career ended up roofing houses. And other guys went on and became massive success. So I don't really understand. That has to do sometimes people lose the drive for the audition process, which is hard to sustain for years at a time. And one of the biggest disillusionments is, look, I get offered work only for a long time, but you're still asked to audition. And that's disheartening for a lot of people, and it's a brutal, highly creative, but brutal process. And some people just can't take it after a while. Particularly, it's very debilitating for women. I mean, people don't really realize how competitive and how hard the audition process is. And after you do that for a number of years, people just, they collapse on it. They just can't do it anymore. Even guys who, they'll be on a soap for 10 years and be driving Porsches and making hundreds of thousands of dollars. That gig ends and they just can't put it together to audition again. And I don't know what Bradley's individual situation is, but it's a tough gig. I mean, there are very few people that I started out with that are still acting. It's a tough warrior-like grind, and if you don't stick with it, you're not going to continue to work. And it's even worse now with digital submissions and stuff. Every audition is a miracle, and every job is just an absolute gift from God. So unless you break into kind of like what I've done, which is to be offered work, and that's been happening for years. But for many years, I also had to audition. And anything you do on network television or mainstream television or cable, you're going to have to audition because they can't make decisions. if it, like I worked with Spielberg and top directors, they didn't even audition me because they're masters of their craft. They know they can manipulate. They'll just talk to you for a while. Even meet Spielberg for Minority Report. He just saw me in something else and hired me. But in network television and cable television, nobody can make a decision. And there's so many people involved that, you're going to have to audition no matter what it is. And a lot of people just can't handle that after a while. And then time rolls on, and unless you do incredibly creative work and you really work hard, the world moves on. It just does. I mean, ageism, it's particularly tough for actresses. It's just a grind. And that's why actresses get married. They just step out for a while. They get disillusioned because they're only being asked to do the same kind of part. It's not for the lighthearted. It's a wonderful, wonderful career if you're working. I think one of the reasons I kept working was because, I made auditioning an absolute art form, and I teach it to other people. It's a highly competitive thing, and there's a methodology to it. And most acting schools, most acting coaches don't teach it because they've never lived through it. It's like you're going to war with people who've never fired a gun. Mm-hmm. And so I made, first and foremost, auditioning an absolute mastery situation for myself. Secondly, I was a writer to begin with, and I know that helped improvisationally, and that helped in I would get hired because directors would know I could polish the script, and I'd get paid extra for it. They'd know that I could come up with really interesting improvisational lines because I was well-read and cultivated that skill. I did a lot of dialects. The whole thing is, how can I be so useful to the business in the widest spectrum of things? Because then you're going to get more job opportunities. Young actors, they put no emphasis on dialects. How many jobs do you think involve a dialect? South African, New Zealand, Cockney, French American, Mexican American, Texas American. There's hundreds of them. And so I made that a passionate hobby early on. So pretty soon you become the guy, we can call him because he does dialects really well.
Now, this was going to be a two-part question. Now it's actually going to be a three. One of your more iconic films is, of course, especially with us action fans, Death Warrant with Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Sure.
Did you, I'll make the first, what was an audition process like for a film like that?
Well, that one wasn't a particularly difficult one. I understood how to do that part right away. So I went in and auditioned for Jean-Claude, and I booked his name. Marc DeSalle was the producer, and I booked the job. Originally, they hired me to play the part that Art LaFleur ended up doing, the prison guard.
Okay.
So I started studying with LAPD how to use a baton really well, in a very showy way. And then I started studying pistols and shotguns and sniping and combat tactical carbine and everything else with those guys, just because I love learning new things, and that stood me in good stead. But ultimately, I just auditioned for the Sandman, and I got it. I knew how to do the part, and they hired me on the spot. So that wasn't a particularly, I did 26 auditions to get on X-Files. I think I hold the world's record for auditioning for X-Files. I finally got on, but the Sandman thing was not particularly a difficult process.
Now, do you have a martial arts background?
No, but I have football, basketball, baseball, horseback riding, shooting, swimming, lifeguarding, wrestling, tennis, boxing, every kind of athletic thing you can imagine, fencing. And I dabbled in all of those things and played them in school, and jiu-jitsu, and when I'll get a part, I do whatever's required. So again, I call it movie black belt because those fight scenes and those kind of things, it helps to have a martial arts background, and I always recommend my students learn about these things. Again, that fits in with the more you know how to do, the universe is going to respond and give you an opportunity to do it. So if you learn how to take photography, you're going to get hired as a job as a photographer. If you know all those martial arts, you know, cape work, knife work, broadsword, all that stuff. I was always interested in that stuff. So I just motorcycling, tactical driving with a car. I mean, I was getting stuntmen to take me out and do that stuff well before I ever got hired to do it. But then you get on a set and they say, "Will you do this stunt?" And I say, "Hell yeah!" You know. So I call it movie black belt. But the problem is you need to get out in front of the curve because the universe will respond to you doing that work ahead of time. I'll go out and buy clothes, and 2 weeks later, I'm wearing those clothes in a movie. Mm-hmm. A lot of people just don't prepare for things, and you know, young actors will go, "Why do I need to know about writing or producing or directing?" Well, because something chemically happens in your brain, and you become a better actor. And you're going to get hired because of being a better actor because of that.
Now you hear... I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I said, what did you say?
I hear a lot of things. I think we all have about working with Jean-Claude Van Damme. Did you get hurt on the set at all, or was he a professional to deal with?
Well, a lot of this is in my books too, and Jean-Claude is a special case and stuff. On the Sandman, I got popped in the nose pretty badly one time. Is he professional? Yeah, he's professional. But Jean-Claude has a psychological disorder that I call the superhero syndrome. He thinks that he's this professional, super professional hero in any situation that he's in. I guess it's good that he plays the parts that he does. The truth is, nobody cares if somebody gets hurt, gets hit. People care, but everybody expects that you're going to get hit sooner or later. If you fight anybody for 18 hours a day, somebody's going to get popped. And the vast majority of people are very gracious about that, and they understand we're imperfect human beings. And so it's how you behave after that becomes important. Are you gracious after that? You strive to make sure that doesn't happen. So Jean-Claude is a very special case psychologically. He's very self-involved, egomaniacal. He thinks if anything happens, it's the other person's fault. I mean, this is a guy who stabbed an extra in the eye with a plastic knife.
Yes.
And then had the audacity to say on court TV that the accident would have been much worse if he wasn't a supreme professional. I mean, you know, he said he never hit anybody. He's hit everybody he ever worked with. And that's not the big issue. People get hurt. You try to minimize it. What's the issue is, do you say, I'm very sorry, I'm upset, let's try to do better, or do you try to blame the other person? You know, Jean-Claude is a very deeply flawed person. It's sad in a way because there's still a lot of distribution interest about him, and a lot of people adore him. And he's a good spirit somewhere down the line, but he's also supremely undisciplined now, probably has organic brain damage from drug use. Certainly smokes marijuana a lot, and none of that leads itself to doing high-quality work and learning lines properly. And he can't do it, and so he then lashes out at the people that he works with. Again, not with me, because people don't lash out at me. They lash out at the weak, like the director or the cinematographer. I'm not implying they're weak, but, you know, not somebody who looks like a Navy SEAL. But they throw an ashtray at the craft service girl. You know, I didn't say Jean-Claude did that. Another actor did that. But bullies don't go after people that aren't vulnerable. They go after the vulnerable. And, no, thanks, my love. I have fun with it, and I have fun with it in the book about all of the experiences with it. It's tragic because it's only hurting himself. I mean, films figure out a way to shoot around him and stunt double, but you're not really acting with Jean-Claude. You know, you're acting with a supremely undisciplined person, and it happens to a lot of people. You know, I've done 4 or 5 films recently, and the leading man couldn't learn their lines, so he used cue cards. I never want to go down that slippery slope. I get joy out of learning the lines and playing with them. Now, the one exception to that is Eric Roberts. He works so much that I understand why he uses cue cards. He literally doesn't have time to learn lines. So you're doing a scene and outside, and cue cards are all over the house and everything else. And that's the way he wants to work, and I get it. It saves him time. He does a great job with that. Jean-Claude can't even use cue cards. By the way, I got his cue cards from Blackwater at home because I was going to frame them and call it indulgence. And, you know, he can't use cue cards. He can't even repeat phrases that are uttered to him by the script supervisor or the director off camera. He tried to pretend that he was doing it because English wasn't his first language. It's complete nonsense. It's because he's smoking dope all day. You know, so I hate to pop people's balloons, but that's the way it is. All of that stuff is articulated in my book. And you know what? I like him deep down. He's a sweet guy. 1 minute he's your worst enemy, and the next minute he's your best friend. He's by nature a generous person. He's by nature a really fine storyteller. And people don't realize how hard he worked just to get to a movie like Death Warrant or Bloodsport. He worked really, really hard and was supremely disciplined. But somewhere along the line, it's gone south. And hopefully he'll pull it out. I don't know. That's basically where it is. It doesn't give me any satisfaction to say those things. But I say in the book, I've wrestled with being a journalist on the one hand and a Christian spiritualist on another, which doesn't believe in saying anything negative about anybody. Well, the journalist in me always wins out. I tell the truth about what's the situation. Not because I don't love Jean-Claude. I do. And frankly, from my point of view, the nutballs make things interesting.
Yeah.
You know, guys like Peter Green and Gary Busey and Michael Madsen and Mickey Rourke, they're crazy, but they make things interesting. If I'm a producer, I'm going to isolate them from the production because they'll destroy your production. You've got to be very crafty how you use those people, and you better make sure that they respect you, because if they don't respect you, they're going to destroy your film.
Now, when you mentioned people being bullies, I have to skip ahead now to the most notorious bully in Hollywood that most people won't even leave a comment on. You worked on Under Siege 2 with Steven Seagal.
Yeah.
How was that?
Well, Steven is an extremely distant human being. He and I had nice conversations, and there was kind of a, alpha male sort of respect. I had a fling with his mistress about 4 hours after I got on the set. So I think he was probably done with her. But so we had a kind of interesting mano a mano kind of respect for each other. But again, you don't really act with Steven. He flies in, he drops in, he says his lines, he does his thing, and then he leaves. I don't, it's not really like you're acting and working out things. Interestingly enough, some of these people, they don't feel like they want to, or they're interested in going further. Like I suggested to him that we have a fight where we both have automatic machine pistols, and you don't even have to fire them off. You can add that later. And, but it would be really cool. Maybe even one hand has a knife and the other hand has a machine pistol. So you're blasting as you do this sort of circular dance. You're blasting all over the place and trying to stab each other. And he wouldn't do it. And I don't know why, because at the time that would have been a much more, I'm always looking for the forward thing to do. But it's not the first time I've run into this phenomenon where people don't want to go further, and they don't want to. So I don't know quite what it is, except that they lose courage in something that they're doing. The thing about Steven is I don't know what he's like now, because I haven't seen him for a while, but he was very disrespectful to women and to other guys as regards to their women. And so I'm surprised he hasn't been completely had up by the Me Too movement, because you're talking about a funny story. When I went into to meet him for Under Siege 2, when a guy is like that, they're very easily conned. Like I had a house in Santa Barbara, and I knew if I said I had a house in Santa Barbara, he would, that would elevate me in his eyes. It shouldn't, but I knew it would. And he said, "What have you been doing?" And I said, "Well, I just finished this movie with Jean-Claude, Death Warrant, and it's number 3 in the nation." And he looked at me with a straight face and he said, "Yeah, it's too bad the kid can't act." And I was like, holy Christ, this is the pot calling the kettle black. But the overall thing that I got from working with Steven was, if that was a movie star, I didn't want to be a movie star. But of course, that's not really what a movie star is. And my wife and I sit and watch his current movies, and we crack up. It's like high camp stuff.
Yeah, especially when he doesn't even go back to redub his own voice. That's pretty bad.
Well, again, you're talking about major ego. I mean, pathological egomaniac. What's good about Under Siege 2 was Jeff Murphy, the director. I mean, he was a visionary director. He did a lot of, if you think back on it, not that many people were doing 7 different action cuts, scenes, sequences, cut together simultaneously. And that movie has a lot of that. And, but his conflicts with Steven it almost drove Jeff out of the business. He ended up having a tremendous career as second unit director on The Lord of the Rings because he's Australian. But a great guy, and just was put through the ringer by the studio and Steven. You know, if you're strong, and there were lots of guys, that job was so much fun because it was every stunt guy on the planet, and they're a very irreverent crowd to begin with. And there were a lot of New York actors and LA actors, and those guys don't take any crap either. And so Steven comes in with his sycophants and tries to run things by intimidation. It just doesn't work. You know, it just doesn't work. But that said, I didn't have any problem with them. I rarely have problems with people. I'm there to do a job, and I'm there to deliver the goods. And that's all I'm there to do. And to observe, because I'm going to be writing about it someday. So, I mean, Blackwater was crazy, and it just makes great fodder for my second volume of my book. Steven he's an egomaniac, so what are you going to do?
Well, now I have to ask, because I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I've got to skip to one of my favorite movies, a movie that I've championed. I'd like to think I'm partially responsible for all my work over 5 years for getting a Blu-ray release. You were in one of the greatest 90s movies ever. You played Lee in Showdown.
Yeah, but by the way, Billy Blanks is the nicest of human beings. You know, I don't want to think that you've asked me questions about some of these guys. I'll tell you the truth. 95% of most people are extraordinarily nice and great. The remarkable thing about that movie, when I recall, was all the budgets had fallen down. And so the expectations for doing fights were so quick. I mean, we did virtually all the fights in that movie in one day. And then I had a job in Australia. So I finished that, took a shower at a little hotel room they got me there, and they rushed me to the airport, flew to LA, met my kids for 2 hours, caught a plane to Hawaii, then a plane to whatever Australian city, Brisbane or whatever, and then went from there to Sydney, then got in a limo and drove for 4 hours. So it was 24 hours of flight after being exhausted from doing all the flights to the fights for Showdown. I remember it as being a very nice group of young people. I had a good time. All that successes control stuff and everything was improv, as everything on Death Warrant was improv, and you just wing it. Whipping Billy Blanks with my belt was, I was trying to get the white overseer black slave thing in.
Now, when Billy, who's probably one of the greatest kickboxers ever, when you fought him, I'm willing to bet that every time he hit you, you didn't feel a thing. Am I correct on that?
No, I don't remember ever being struck in that thing. You don't. Look, you just do, you do the dance, you go through the steps. If you're a quick study, and I blessedly became a good, almost a photographic memory. So in quick order, you can memorize the steps and you just go with it. And And if you're any good at your craft, and anybody who does that, like Philip Ree or Simon Ree, any of these guys are good at their craft. I do believe in going for it, because people actually get hurt when you do things 10 times because it's not hard enough. So it's the delicate balance between not hitting somebody but giving full emotional content to it. There are also lots of little tricks to sell a blow and to implement it without anybody getting hurt. There's no necessity to getting hurt. But if somebody gets popped, you say sorry, and or you apologize profusely, and or if you're the one who gets hit, you go, no big deal, let's go. Yeah, no, Billy never hit me.
He seems like a really good guy, and then, he went on to do Tybo. I mean, Christine Taylor in the film, she went on to bigger things. Ken Scott became a Ninja Turtle. I mean, a lot of careers kind of came out of that little film that a lot of people don't realize.
Yeah. The Ninja Turtle guy went on and became a film executive. I've occasionally seen those people. Of course, Christine married Ben Stiller. And now I think is divorced. They've divorced. But, yeah, Billy's a sweetheart. He's a sweetheart.
That truly is one of my favorite films. I think everyone that reads my site, that is usually in their top 10, of all time. It overranks The Karate Kid, to be honest with you, in my circle.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. They're fun to do. I worked with Bob Radler, the director, a lot. Probably did 5 films with him. And I have no idea what he's doing these days. But it's just go for it. You go for it as quickly as you can and as swiftly as you can. Do the work and move on to the next job.
Now, would you rather do any film is a payday, of course, but is it more fun to do a film like Showdown that you do in a few days, or a film with like Eraser with Arnold where you're there for weeks on a time?
Well, the funny thing about they all are fun in their own way, but Eraser, the work that I did in Eraser, if you were doing a guest star thing on television, you do that entire job in about a day and a half at the most. And Eraser was a great deal of fun because I really enjoyed working with Arnold. He was not an arrogant person at all. He's a lot of fun. Jimmy Caan is fantastic and funny as hell, even though he would pistol whip me. He'd forget his lines, so he'd pistol whip me harder. I guess in his mind he thought, well, they'll be able to use some of the footage if I beat up Patrick harder. But he wasn't really hurting me, and I'd say, hey, just because you forget your lines doesn't mean you get to pistol whip me harder. But he's hysterically funny, and he's a real guy, he's very authentic. And Vanessa Williams was fantastic, but you're not doing a whole hell of a lot, but you're getting paid a lot of money. So you take it for what it is. While I'm on the set of Eraser, I did a movie called Riot, I think it was called. 2 days, $5,000. 5 minutes after you're there, you're doing your own stunt driving, shooting your own guns, doing a crazy dialect, Irish dialect, and improvising everything you're doing. And it's down and dirty, and that's a lot of fun. So, there's no boredom on something like that. And, again, on a job like Eraser, sometimes you got to bring your computer in or your good book or something like that and occupy yourself with some work or whatever you're doing. 'Cause there's so even if you're Tom Cruise on Minority Report, you got a lot of downtime.
Now, is there anyone that you have yet to work with that you really want to?
Well, I really respect Sylvester Stallone. I'd love to work with him. There's a lot of people, because there's a lot of actors in that sort of high, Leonardo DiCaprio and Christian Bale's an awesome actor. There's plenty of directors that I'd like to work with, Steven Soderbergh. There's whole realms of, I've spent most of my life in the action realm and action TV. There's whole realms of, I'd love to work in foreign countries more. I've worked in London a lot, in Australia, and Canada a lot, but I'd love to do some French films and Italian films and Russian films. There's all kinds of people out there to work with.
Any director that you would like to work with that you haven't had a chance to yet?
Well, when it's the right project, I listen, in the years, I would have loved to have worked with Michael Mann. I would have loved to have worked with, although politically he and I are complete opposites, but I think Oliver Stone does some important work. And I have a lot of respect for him. Let me think. Who are some other directors I'd like to work with?
I think you'd be great in a Tarantino movie.
Yeah, I've met Quentin. In fact, I was going to hire him for a project I was doing, and I said I would pay. He didn't want to do it until I told him I would pay him with guns. And then he said, "Oh, that's interesting." But yeah, I mean, I'd love to do a Quentin Tarantino movie. I like his stuff a lot. There's a whole bunch of directors. Who else is out there? In the right circumstances, I'd love to work with Michael Bay, in his stuff. I think some of it is very facile sometimes, but it's certainly technically highly skillful and fills a particular kind of big budget realm. He's a really smart guy. Who else? I'd like to work with Gerard Depardieu. I'd like to do different things, I always love to work, but I'd love to find interesting challenges in different kinds of work. I mean, I would go back to stage if I ran into the right thing. I had the privilege of working with Tony Richardson, an Academy Award-winning director at the Los Angeles Theater Center. And I did some stage in New York, and that was pivotal stuff. So you just take what comes and see what you give it your best shot in everything you do. There's some Australian directors. The guy who does, have you ever seen the television show Rake?
I have.
I love that show. There's a lot. I'd love to work with the guys who do the Narcos projects. Different directors, but I think the guy who played Pablo Escobar, it's an absolutely towering performance. Love to work with somebody like that. The guys who did the Cali Cartel, the young guy, brilliant, just brilliant stuff. So there's millions of people, hundreds and hundreds of people to work with.
Any desire to do like a Marvel, like one of the superhero films?
Sure, I will. I'm not particularly drawn to projects like that because I think there's something missing with them sometimes because they don't make the emotional content to a story. Obviously that's a very subjective thing. I think they're technically very adept, but I think what's missing sometimes is the emotional content. If you take a movie like 300, that has plenty of emotional content. I really think the emotional content is what separates really extraordinary films from the lesser things. So, yeah, you have to have things that are just mind candy, but I'm most drawn to things like 300 and Braveheart and Saving Private Ryan, and which is, for my mind, is about as good as it gets at the studio level. Lone Survivor, Sniper, really fabulous films. I'd love to work with Clint Eastwood. There's plenty of people. Although there was a time when I was critical of Clint Eastwood because, we were involved in 2 wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and nobody was coming out with positive American films. No. There wasn't a Sniper that came out that, and I think that's appalling. That's an intellectual vacuum that is inappropriate. Do I think that Flags of Our Fathers should get made? Sure. But not in an intellectual vacuum for 12 years where there's nothing positive about America. Mm-hmm. I believe passionately that America is in many ways the light of the world. And if it's not celebrated, and there's plenty to celebrate, then the world isn't a better place if America goes dark. Mm-hmm. So I had some problems. I mean, Spielberg and Tom Hanks are always doing historical things about, and I'm grateful for that. But there was a point in time where nobody was doing anything. You're telling me there's not one positive pro-American thing to come out of Afghanistan or Iraq? It wasn't until Hurt Locker that that tide began to turn. Now the culture has changed a little bit. You've got Mark Wahlberg and Peter Berg and Jerry Bruckheimer doing things that are bolstering of the national character, and I think our young people are owed that. When I grew up, you were watching films that celebrated the tumult of America and the sacrifice, everything from Sands of Iwo Jima to, A Bridge Too Far. It's an extraordinary film. Yes, yes, it was a ultimately failed thing, but it's a tremendously extraordinary film done by Richard Attenborough. So there you go. There's lots of people I'd like to work with. And whether I disagree with somebody politically or whatever means nothing. I never bring these things onto the set. I'm not there to do that. I'm there to deliver the goods in whatever I'm doing. But as a citizen of America, I think one needs to speak out a bit.
Who do you think will be the first one to make a movie about the coronavirus?
I don't really know, but I do know that it's affecting the polish of my second volume of memoirs. It's hard to write historically about being in X-Files or Boomtown or UC Undercover or Westerns with Tom Selleck and Sam Elliott while we're going through this time too. So in a sense, I'm writing 2 books. So I just watched, I'm sure you've seen it too, Contagion.
Oh, yes.
Oh my God. It's like word for word what we're going through. I mean, it's almost like, and I don't believe this, but it's like if the CIA wanted to do a blueprint of exactly what we were doing now, they just copy Contagion.
100%, basically.
Yeah. I mean, the same words, social distancing, everything. I mean, it's quite remarkable. I think that's really remarkable when art, like heat, heat comes 6 weeks before the Northridge bank robbery. Mm-hmm. I think it's really remarkable when films and art precede reality by a very, very short period of time. My one problem with how the coronavirus is being dealt with is the world should have been ready for this period. I mean, I'm not a prophet, but I knew this was going to happen. You know, the bottom line is the signs have been out there for a long time. I mean, we went through SARS and avian flu. It was only a question of time before something broke out.
Mm-hmm.
And so governments really should have been ready for this. You know, if you study World War II and governments, sure, governments had some weird things, but there were some pretty visionary people running the American experiments at that time. I sometimes wonder how much vision is being used in Hollywood and in government. They should have been ready for a pandemic well before this happened.
Or at least when it first started in China. I mean, they had about a 3 or 4 month head start on us.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm telling you, I'm still using masks and stuff. When I saw avian flu, I got ready for avian flu. When I saw SARS, I got ready for SARS. When I saw the 92 riots after Rodney King, I was already ready for social unrest. I'm not blowing my own horn. I'm saying it doesn't take a mind reader to realize that these things are going to happen. We're going to have a nuclear problem sometime, just like we did with Chernobyl. We're going to have pandemics, and people need to be ready for them. Not only people, but institutions and governments. And that's a flaw when they're not. Because that's what you're paid to do, is to get ready for those things.
When I always look at the worst case scenario, I see the social distancing becoming a martial law, becoming a curfewed area of National Guard, which then in turn leads to riots and looting.
Well, I don't think it's going to come to that, because they'll get a handle on this one. But I'm ready for it if it does. I mean, I'm armed to the teeth and have been for many, many years. In fact, I had a side business of taking firearms into films, and so they could use them for films, and certified cinematic armor. I mean, I just, that was my golf, was shooting. So, yeah, I mean, the patina of civilization, we're very isolated here in America because we're well taken care of. But the patina of civilization, as you say, is extremely thin. We saw it at Katrina. We didn't see it that much in the San Francisco earthquake, but we certainly saw it in the 92 riots here, and we saw it in the 64 riots in L.A. And if things break down, I mean, we saw it in the Civil War. They had like 10,000 people killed in riots in New York City. I mean, come on, people. It doesn't take rocket science to see that these things can happen. So, as a father, I mean, my kids make fun of me, but in my car alone, I can fish, I can hunt, I can spearfish, I can fight off somebody who's got an assault weapon. Became a reserve patrolman just so I could carry a pistol around the country. I don't often carry one, but sometimes I feel irresponsible not doing so.
No, I'm a martial arts weapon aficionado, so I have knives and swords and spears and knives in my boot, necklaces that become knives. I'm always pretty. And my son also will laugh, but it's like, well, I'm ready in case anything ever happens.
Well, I agree with you, and that's at the level that I just had a shipment of knives arrive from someplace that, you know, yeah, they need to be handy and they need to be there, not just for self-defense, even though in California the government has done an immense amount of stuff to remove people's abilities to defend themselves, but you've got to circumvent that with knives, and you've got to, I have some of the same things. I think that's just being responsible. That's being a good citizen, and by the way, you ought to know how to do emergency field medicine and CPR and lifeguarding skills. So it's just part of evolving in your skill set. It's the same mental exercise as learning dialects to be an actor. That's where the work is, so you better be ready for it. Anyway, I really enjoyed talking to you. I look forward to talking to you again when Volume 2 comes out. I do want to say I hope people will go to PatrickKilpatrick.com and get an autographed copy of the book. Or they can go on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and those kind of things and get a Kindle or an audio book or a hard copy, whatever they want, and I know they'll enjoy it. We've got 100% 5-star reviews and got a Best of LA award. So I think they'll find it a great read. I've enjoyed that process, and I'm enjoying Volume 2 too. So
I encourage everybody to get the autographed copy.
Well, then you just go to PatrickKilpatrick.com and it'll direct you to that. And we'll mail you out a copy. And I will see you with Volume 2. We'll definitely keep you in the mix for that when we do that tour. I think, look, the thing that we need to understand is this will pass. And I think, I've done in Venice writing on the book, and I remember my dog Molly, an Irish Terrier, one of the finest dogs I've ever seen. And she ran across the bike path one time and got hit by a bicycle. Well, the good news was that taught Molly never to run across the bike path without looking.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this pandemic is going to give us that skill set. We're going to, I hope, and by the way, I've been calling for it publicly for a long time. We need to divest from China. I mean divest. And because they have 1 million people under concentration camp, they're a completely ruthless authoritarian regime. They'll do nothing to get in the way of extending the Communist Party's power. I've turned down work from those people. We need to pull our systems out of that and our corporations out of that, get them back home and working here. I think that will fall out from this deal, and I think this country will be much better off for having gone through this experience and be ready for the next thing, which could be entirely more virulent, entirely more devastating. So it's a warning sign, and I think it'll ultimately be a good thing. There are very few things, in the human condition that don't have positive ramifications from what they're going through. Do I want to get ill? Hell no. And do I want to be in this healthcare system now with it being overwhelmed? Hell no. But we'll get through this, and this time will pass as it always has in the past, and there's no need to be anxiety-ridden about it. You do the best you can and go on.
That's why I encourage all my fans to watch movies like Showdown, Death Warrant, Eraser. Take your mind off of things. Can't focus on the news and be paranoid. You need entertainment at this time more than ever.
Well, I agree, and I would encourage them to put together something brilliant, small, web, whatever it is, and contact me, and I'll be happy to help out because I've got a lot of resources and a lot of really great actors that can come to bear. and a lot of supplies and everything else, and happy to work with young people and older people and guide them. I run a mentorship program here, so we teach people how to act and be entertainment warriors. And so anything I can do to help, just give me a jingle, and I'm pretty easy to get a hold of.
You called me right back.
Well, I'm about expediting things, Corey.
And I'm nobody.
I could have sent an email back to Lori and say, sure, tell him to schedule a time. But I thought, hell, I'll just call him. And so I'm pretty accessible because I think that's part of the business, and I like people. And it also takes a lot more energy to be negative and inaccessible than it does to be accessible. So onward and upward. Let me know if I can help out in any way, and I look forward to seeing the piece. Take care.
You too. Thank you so much. Stay safe.
Sure. You too.
Bye.